Yeah, you just in all that you just hear how tumultuous these times were for England, for the church, and for Benjamin Keach just as an individual, as a minister. And he gets in hot water too. And one of the things that you have here in Volume One is his children's primer. And this children's primer gets Keach in a lot of trouble. What is so controversial that well, one, what is a children's primer, and what was so controversial about it?
Okay, so this is 1660. Once every minister, every clergyman is required to abide by the Book of Common Prayer. Um, this book is deemed a schismatic book, meaning it goes against that teaching. It was against, specifically in Keach's trial, it was specifically against his mode of baptism, talking about these children being baptized when obviously they're not infants anymore. These are older kids. So, in general, the primer is an instruction book for children that was used throughout the early modern England. Um, and Keach surprisingly was very invested in remarkable ways into the education of children. Back at this time, obviously, Sunday school didn't exist in the way we're thinking, where you take the kids out and all that kind of stuff. But as a precursor to that, he did teach the kids, and he used these primers in order to teach them. And he wrote a number of them. Now, you mentioned the first volume. In that volume, my co-editor Ian and myself included the transcript of the trial rather than the work itself, because the work itself was destroyed. All the copies were brought up and burnt as part of the punishment for what he had done. But we do have the majority of what it was, because Keach would later, in the 1690s, would, I think 96 or 97, he later recreates in Instructions for Children. He recreates a lot of that same material. So we understand what he was saying and what he talked about. But in this instance, we don't actually have any, because it was in October. He was put on trial. The Chief Justice at the time would have been Robert Hyde, sentenced Keach to 2 weeks imprisonment. He fined him £20. He left him 2 days in the pillory, both in Aylesbury and Winslow, Keach's home. And this ultimately was the persecution that I mentioned earlier that led Keach to London, that he would leave this context. In part, one of the reasons that would lead him down to London was because this book, which contradicted what the approved teaching, sanctioned teaching of the church, got him in so much trouble, and he ultimately faced punishments for that.
Wow. Yeah. So it's a really interesting read to see that transcript of the trial and just the penalties that he faced with that. The pillory, I mean, that's like the stockade, right? Where you got your head and your arms through.
That's
Is that
right.
what that is?
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
kind of
There's a
subject to
beautiful
open mocking from the populace.
Yeah, and there's a beautiful scene where his wife would stand beside him, because again his hands would be held up so he couldn't do anything, and she would hold his Bible in front of him, and he would be preaching to the people that gathered. And in one instance, where they originally came to mock and insult him, by the end of his pillory in Aylesbury, he's preaching to them, and they're all listening intently to what he has to say. And yeah, what the enemy meant for evil, God can use for good.
A wonderful picture of who Benjamin Keach was.